Today, on episode number 76 of the NP Business Matters podcast, we'll be talking about getting a job. And I know that sounds weird coming from the NP Business Matters podcast, but stay tuned and you'll see why. Hello and welcome to the NP Business Matters podcast, the show that's dedicated to helping nurse practitioners just like you succeed in business. I'm your host, Barbara C. Phillips, founder of Nurse Practitioner Business Owner. And since 2007, we've been working with you on the business of being a nurse practitioner, providing education, resources, and support as you start, grow, and operate your own practice. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just getting started, this podcast is designed to help you navigate the challenges and the opportunities of running your own practice. I'll cover a wide range of topics from startup and finance to marketing and operations. I invite you to subscribe and listen to each episode for tips, insights, how-tos that you need to succeed. To learn more about NPBO and our resources, visit us at npbusiness.org. So, Renee, I wanted to bring you in here today to talk to us about career coaching. Just what is it and why should NPs partake of career coaching? Because I personally, what I'm seeing is a lot of brand new grads wanting to start businesses. I don't think they're ready to start businesses. They need to kind of fine tune how to be an NP first before they go and start their own practices. But I keep hearing people are having trouble today finding a job.
Well, yes, thanks again for inviting me back again. But yes, you're touching on a really important subject. It is a bit of a tougher market now. It was a tough market going into the pandemic, and the pandemic just sort of sealed that it became a tougher market during that time. Many healthcare organizations were not only that they weren't ready to hire more people, obviously, during the pandemic, but they're trying to just hold on to the employees they had. Many laid off during that time. And it's just now starting to open up a little bit again. So new graduates also are going to be competing with perhaps seasoned NPs who kind of either were laid off during the pandemic or decided during the pandemic they needed to make a change as well for whatever reason. So, it may have been brewing in the back of their minds for some time. And then the pandemic was like, okay, this is it. I need to move into something else now. So there is that competition because it is, like I said, it's just a tight market. I think that, talking to someone, well, first of all, a career coach can kind of help you to align your goals and focus your goals and make a more thoughtful search so you don't expend a lot of energy chasing in the wrong directions or having to learn a lot of things on your own. So that part can be helpful because oftentimes new graduates, especially, and season two, I talked to many of those, just need somebody to bounce this stuff off of. And it's tough to find that person. And so, going with somebody who does that can be helpful for that. Like I said, just kind of focusing your search, making sure you're putting your best you forward. There's a lot of little tips and tricks to that people may not have thought of. And again, colleagues and so on can be helpful, but they don't have a very wide experience in job searching necessarily. And so someone who's, more familiar with that can give you advice that's going to fit multiple employers rather than tailoring to just one organization that, like your friend or your instructor or whoever is familiar with. And so I think that's, one of the things that we can do. And that in itself can be really helpful. I think that it's not unusual. I know that it's not unusual as graduation gets near for students that are ready to get out there just start getting a little panicked. You've been in school a long time, you've spent a lot of money, you probably had to cut down your hours at your nursing job in order to finish your program. And now they're kind of like, oh my gosh, I need to get out there and I need to start working. And that panic or anxiety or whatever you want to call it can sometimes lead you in a direction that maybe you don't want to, or is not the best for your long-term goals. So I think that that's unique amongst folks that are, approaching graduation. They're looking for jobs. They're seeing there's not a ton open. They're finding lots of competition. And again, not having someone who can kind of guide them. I think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, I think too, one of the things that we said prior to us getting started on this was that sometimes what is the way that, sometimes people take jobs just to take jobs to have them, but they're terrible fit and they never stay. It's kind of like just putting it out there and spraying it around to see what is going to stick. And that never works for anyone.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Very often, again, it leads to a mismatch. If
Right.
nothing else, between your personality and where you're working. Many years ago, I remember reading something, I don't remember the source of it right now, but that said that within a year, like up to 50% of new graduates will start looking for a different job. And so this is not a new issue for people just graduating. Again, I think it's that, oh my gosh, I'm done. I need to get out there and I need to get this job. Like right now, maybe you hear about a student peer who's got a job and you start feeling a little competitive, like they have a job. Why don't I have a job? And this is, not good. And is it taking too long? Is there something wrong with me? And I always used to tell people that it's a lot like getting a job offer is a lot like a marriage proposal. You sort of get, swept off your feet. Oh, they want me. This is great. They love me. And you forget to think, do I like him?
Yeah.
And like a marriage, it's a lot easier to get into than to get out of.
Right.
And so you really kind of want to be thoughtful about that. You don't want your work history to be full of a lot of divorces,
No.
That's a problem.
Yeah, and what you're saying about, and people want to, they like me type of a thing. When I graduated from my FMP program, now I had all been working and was licensed as a GNP, but now I'm becoming an FMP. I owed 2 years of time of my life to NHSC, National Health Service Corps, which was fine. I had no problem with that. I cannot tell you how many resumes, phone calls, and everything that I sent out. I thought it would be a piece of cake to get a job. I'm supposed to work in some underserved community. They're being paid to have me there. It shouldn't be that big of an issue. It was horrible. And where I finally ended up, I was unable to work. None of the physicians there would sign the collaboration paperwork at that time, which was new to me because I'd always practiced in a full practice state. But, I was there 9 months, unable to function as a nurse practitioner when I finally just left.
And what a terrible experience as your first experience.
As an FNP.
That is so demoralizing. I too, when I graduated, like you, we've been around a little while. Yeah, and NPs were not nearly as common when I graduated. It was still sort of a evolving profession. And I remember too, it was a tight market then. Again, just because we weren't, I think part of it was that we just weren't too well. People didn't really know what we did, at least in this part of the country. And I too kind of ended up jumping at finally when I got an offer. And had I just sat back and done homework a little bit, I would have realized, as I did once I got there, the place was completely dysfunctional. It was
Yeah.
in the news all the time, being investigated for all kinds of things. It is to this day.
Oh, and it's
And
still in
you know what I
operation.
mean? This was not a recipe for success.
Right.
And, it was a horrible first job. That's not what you should have when you start your first job. It should be a good experience. It should make you feel good about what you decided to do for your life's
Yeah,
career.
it absolutely. And it should be, as you said, not that desperation mode. I mean, I
Right.
felt desperation because if I didn't get my job and get that 2 years under my belt, I was going to owe the US government over $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And a
my
lot of
motto
folks,
has always been do not mess with the government.
yeah, that's a good motto. That's
Leave
a
the
good motto.
feds alone. So yeah, so there was some desperation. But
Yeah,
had I done as exactly as you said, done a little bit of homework, I would have seen the issues and not
yeah,
gone there, not
yeah.
moved across
And
the country to do that.
yeah, you put those rose-colored glasses on and you think, oh, this is going to be great. And some of it is, you graduate and everybody's going, did you get a job yet? And the weeks kind of go by and people start freaking, oh, if I don't get a job too soon, then I'll never get hired. And kind of right now, it's not unusual to have people looking for something for up to a year, maybe more. It's not unheard of. So it's not such a negative. And now, unlike years past, new graduates at least have the pandemic to maybe, rationalize the slow thing. So,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, we didn't even have a reason that we could give people for why you hadn't gotten a job. Now, at
Right.
least the
Right.
pandemic gives you a little cover if you haven't found what you're looking for. Um, and I think also, folks like me can help people keep their goals or their expectations realistic.
Yeah.
Um, you know, are you, there's a lot of realistic that can sort of a reality check, which always happens when any profession, I'm sure, when they leave school and start something, is that, that you may be way out of line in what you think the pay might be or these kinds of things. But not only that, I have a lot of people who come to me who want to relocate too. And I'm like, wow, you got a lot you got to sell here to somebody. If now you want to go to another state or another city or whatever, and it's your first job, and now you sort of started piling on these things, and just relocating alone is during a tight market is employers are not keen to jump on that bandwagon necessarily if they've got a lot of local people who want the job, that you have to depend on somebody moving and liking it where they move too. So
Right.
there's that piece that people just kind of get this over exuberance, and I get it. Like I said, your loans are coming due and all these things kind of on the horizon, and you're itching to get going, but it is important to make the right choice. And then, you can blow up your chances of getting hired if you're just shooting out resumes to everything. If you've got, and now almost every organization, because there's just not a lot of small practices left, I don't think, in the United States. It's all big organizations, big med. And they're using electronic systems to track. And when they start seeing multiple applications, they start to kind of go, oh, what's going on there? And they think that person doesn't even know what they want, or they're desperate. And so it can actually work against you if you applied for every job that opens up.
So when you're saying that these organizations are using electronic systems, are they sharing electronic systems? Or, I mean, so if I apply to every job that might be available at the university hospital, only the university hospital is going to see that,
Right.
not the university hospital in the next town.
Right, right. Yeah,
Okay.
they're not sharing, but don't think that HR people don't have their conferences where they talk about
Oh,
everybody too. You know what I
this
mean?
is true.
As of
This
when I
is
was
true.
recruiting, we oftentimes did, we called it splits, where we would, share a job with another recruiting agency, or they had the candidate, we had the job, whatever. A little conversation with them, and they'd seen a lot of the same names we had, you know? So, you kind of want to be strategic about that, because now, as the programs get more and more sophisticated, they can simply just weed out ones that are in there 10 times before, and the person may never even see them. Like, the computer does a whole sorting before it even gets to eyes in many places. Some places still have the HR or the recruiter, whoever's in charge of it, looking at each one. But there again, I can tell you from years of looking at applications and resumes, your eyes start to cross after a little while, and it's only the best are going to jump out at you.
So, what can somebody do to make sure their resume is jumping out? And especially now that these are mostly electronic, it's not so much what your stationery looks like and what your
Yeah,
header
exactly.
looks like and that kind of stuff. Nobody cares if it's a linen paper or parchment paper. I mean, because it doesn't exist anymore. But if
Right,
I
right.
was looking for my first job, what is it that are some of the things that I can highlight, if I can highlight on these electronic systems?
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that I could put out there?
I always have started using, although I guess maybe now it's getting a little dated because we haven't heard too much from her anymore. But remember the whole, you know, uh, the sparking joy, with cleaning your house. You should be doing the same thing with your resume. Everything in your resume should spark joy in not you, but the employer. Like, you need to not put too much into it. Like, it's not your life story. It's not your diary. It's a resume. It's just headlines. It's enough to get you an interview. You need to put in it what you think the employer's looking for, and luckily they tell you in their job posting what they want. So those skills or whatever need to be in that resume somewhere. But the hardest thing that I have trouble convincing people of, that even though I've said this has been for years now, but they still, a lot of people don't take this advice, is that you need to tailor the resume for each job that you're looking for, or that you're applying to. You cannot, this is why I discourage having someone write it for you. If you get one version, it is not going to fit, same as our clinical guidelines don't exactly fit every person. One resume is not going to fit every job. And if you want to get noticed, you need to tailor it to the job. And that's the biggest thing. And people don't want to do a different one. And really, it's not as hard as people think, because really all you're changing is kind of what clinical skills you're going to highlight, or other types of skills. That's the only piece that needs to change a little bit. The rest is all staying the same. Your education doesn't change. Your work history doesn't change. Like that kind of thing doesn't. So, I tell people, if you're going to make your resume or whatever, create the template with those parts that don't change. Create a different document and just brainstorm and list every possible skill that you have, or that you feel like you have to offer, whether that's you saw a lot of people needing birth control, or you did a lot of heart failure, whatever it is. And it aligns with the job too. I mean, if you're going to be working in a heart failure clinic, they don't care that you can do an Explanon. And then when you're applying, all you need to do is just pull those forward and put them in. And you need to, as a new graduate, you need to highlight your clinical rotations. That is super, super important, but only for your first job. If you keep them on there after that, you start to kind of wonder what's going on, and they get confused whether you have experience or if you're new. But you need to highlight your clinical rotations. That is the most pertinent experience to what you're seeking. Your RN experience is great, but all the recruiters I chat with tell me, you can put that on there, but I'm not going to read it. All they care is that you did work as a nurse. Let's say you are looking to work in a heart failure clinic and your nursing experience was in some cardiac related. That's great. The title is enough. They don't need to know all your nursing duties. They know what a nurse does. And they're not hiring you for that. They want to know more, they'll ask you more.
Right.
But that's what they'll say. Like, put that should come after your clinical rotations. What you want to highlight is what you've been doing, using the skills that you're going to bring to this new job. And that is what's going to catch their attention. So you want to, really think about that. Unfortunately, most universities now use a tracking system that their students use one like Typhon, MetaTracks, whatever version of it there is, where they log all their clinical and it'll tell you, oh, I did X amount of suturing, or I did X amount of diabetes, or I did, or I saw, a lot of women, or, whatever, or maybe, different populations, whether it be cultural or whatever, like you can track all that stuff in there as a student, so utilize that, go in there and kind of see what parts of that you can highlight, and then put that into your resume. But yeah, that not tailoring it to the job is huge, but it can get you overlooked so easily.
You know what this sounds like to me is marketing. Because
well, you are marketing yourself.
Yeah. When you're marketing, it's like the job of a marketer is to get you to read more. So you have many headlines. Sometimes they even test them out on different recipients of who's ever putting their eyes on different things. But the whole idea is for them to see that headline and then to be able to want to read what's next, and then what's next and what's next as they move down, say, a sales page, for instance, or an ad. And as a NP, whether you're new or seasoned, it sounds like that the thing with the resume and job applications really is learning how to market yourself.
Understanding your audience. Yeah, absolutely.
And knowing your audience, definitely.
Yeah, you have to take some time and understand your audience. And that whole concept of, as you said, of grabbing your attention, that finally when somebody is going to look at it, it comes out of the big machine and they're going to look at it, they're going to pull it up. You need that key information to be at the top of your document, not buried way down towards the end.
Yeah.
Look at a newspaper, the old above the fold.
I was going to say,
you got to have it up there. So you don't want to clutter it up the top part with big, long, nobody writes or should be writing objectives for their resume anymore. But people, don't take up that valuable real estate with things like that. They need to see, I've said all along, it's the big three. When I was reviewing zillions as a recruiter, I looked, do you have the educational requirement? Do you have the appropriate license? And do you have the experience or the skills? So you need as much of that as possible to be in the beginning. Usually your education doesn't take up, especially as a new grad. You want to get that out there right away when I graduated, so they know. If you haven't graduated yet, put expected. Like if you're, our students are having their official graduation in 2 weeks. So they can put on their, graduation is May 14, 15, whatever it is, and if you have the graduation date, you put that in there, but then, get right into your clinical experiences so they can see what you've been doing. You have to, again, put yourself in the reader's position. We see when you're in the position of reviewing you see so many, and the ones that are concise and succinct and target your needs as the recruiter, those are the ones that you jump at. As you said, not only is, what kind of paper you printed it on become a non-thing, so has all this crazy formatting. What, we really don't care about that. Just keep the formatting simple, because the other thing is when you submit those, sometimes these automated things, they'll jumble it all up and make a mess of it anyway. Or
Right.
it extracts information from your resume and puts it into their format. I've seen that in many, many big organizations, so that's what the recruiter sees. So don't worry about making it pretty. Just make it readable. And then when you've done it, you can probably go through and cut out about half of it. I mean, I understand it's a shift from writing papers or submitting notes to school where the instructor is commenting on everything you didn't say. This is different. Now, saying less is good. You don't need to tell them every single thing. There's just a lot you can take out so that it doesn't get so darn busy, but when you're in that mode of oh my gosh, on my paper, did I be sure? Oh yeah, I had to make sure to mention this, and all these different things. Well, it's not a term paper.
So it shouldn't be long, but what's an ideal size? And if it's going actually into one of these systems, for somebody who may have worked as a nurse or even as a nurse practitioner for the last 10 years, you don't want to put all of that there, I would assume, but just somehow summarize 10 years of experience in primary care, 5 years experience with critically ill people, something like that?
Well, they are still going to want to see where you did it, which is different
Okay.
from some other professions that do this paragraph of these are my skills. To a certain extent, that can be okay for a very seasoned NP to have a short 4 lines or so at the beginning in this sort of a summary of qualifications type thing. New grads just forget about all that. And quite honestly, the reader doesn't care. The reader doesn't care. Okay. But you want to list your skills where you did them. But for instance, if you were an RL, I was an RN for 10 years before I went back to get my nurse practitioner certification. You can put the employer, the dates, and your job title. You don't need to put in, unless there's some great leadership skill that you want to put in there that you did at that job. Like sometimes people do come into programs from pretty impressive leadership type roles. You might want to put maybe one bullet or something. You definitely don't want to put any non-clinical stuff. Nobody cares you're a barista or they don't. That's just completely inappropriate in our resumes. When you get into your clinicals, there you want, if you're a new grad, you want to be a little bit more. And I generally recommend using kind of bullet points under the, like where you did the rotation. Don't say the dates because, you could have a date span of 3 months and only gone there 3 times, but rather put the hours you did. That's more impactful to the reader. So if you're a student and I did 120 hours at X clinic, that's going to be a lot more impactful than saying you went there for 6 weeks. They don't know how often you went. You could do that probably in, if you went every day, it would be a shorter time. So that part doesn't tell them a lot. But then just kind of bullet point your stuff and don't have too many bullets. Maybe 2 or 3, depending on the job again that you're looking for, and your bullets should correspond to what you're looking for. Don't put in something they're not interested in just because you did it. You're great. That's fine. You're proud of yourself for it. But if it's not of use to the employer, it's just going to take up space. And your resume can be as long as you need it to be. I used to really be kind of strict about, nope, keep it to, 2 pages, 1 if possible. But as long as you're putting the important stuff up first, you continue on as long as you need to. Just know that further towards the end they get, the less they're reading. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure that, if you have hobbies or interests you feel compelled to put on there, that could probably come down towards the end versus what your actual skills are. Do they really care what your project was, your thesis? Maybe if it pertains. Probably not a ton. Probably best brought up in an interview. It could be somewhere towards the end. But yeah, just really trying to to be less wordy, which I know is hard after, again, you've been rewarded as a student for being very wordy. So it's a bit of a shift. And I see this even, I see this even in people's notes. I have my students write a subjective, and then I'm like, okay, tick out, all the she and they said and da 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 da, and rewrite the note like that. And does it still mean the same thing? Did you lose any information? No. You just lost a lot of the stuff nobody wants to read.
Right. Especially
And
if
for
you're
seasoned,
super
it
busy.
is a little trickier, but again, you're going to focus on your NP experience and the job you're looking for. And of course, leadership type things that you've done in those jobs, committees, anything like that is always good for people to see. The only other thing that I might try to pop up there higher somewhere is if you speak another language. That's something that an employer, may be very important to the employer. So that can be a big plus, depending on the job you're applying for. But we're such a multi language society now that it is very, very good if you happen to speak another language, that they know that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, especially, and that comes down to also knowing more about the employer. If that employer tends to serve clients, like, in Washington State, we had a lot of migrant farms. And so your ability to speak Spanish would put you heads and tails above anybody else that may not have that skill. It's just super important. Versus maybe it's an international, in the Seattle area, an international district clinic might require you to speak Mandarin.
I mean, we're a big here I'm in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. We have a lot of refugees from many different countries, and they, depending on where the clinic is situated, they maybe have a large population of that. But again, there you can go if you're applying to, say, a clinic that works with a certain, maybe it's an underserved population or something, which is what FNPs often want to do, which is a great, noble thing. This is our whole profession is sort of based on this. But then go again into those student statistics you had, and at least we ask our students to note whether they had private insurance or Medicaid, or and you can break that down even in your resume. Say, clinic population was X percent of Medicaid or Medicare, or something that tells, or uninsured, tells that clinic, look, I've worked with this population, and this is how, when I did my clinicals, this is the percentage, because numbers are always good. You can be more specific than just saying, oh yeah, there was a lot of them, a lot of this population, or a lot of that. And you can say, 60% of the patients I saw as a student were uninsured. Or identified as whatever that particular clinic is interested in, or looking, whatever need they're looking to meet.
Yeah, their need. Exactly. That's exactly
it's all about them, not about you.
Right.
Which is hard, because your student experience was all about what you need. So now it's a very big shift to everything's kind of to meet my needs. Now I have to kind of get out of that mode, and how am I going to meet their needs?
Let's talk about the actual interview process. Certainly I know as somebody who's owned her own clinic and has hired people, I have seen some atrocious things. When people apply for jobs, by being impaired, dressed inappropriately, not being clean, that kind of thing. What recommendations would you have for, assuming people know how to dress professionally, and maybe we shouldn't make that assumption, but what would be some of the things that they should ask, their behaviors? I know that's pretty broad.
And that's the tricky part with interviews. Because there's obviously millions of questions that could be asked of you. So I always tell people, start with expect the expected. They're always going to ask you strengths and weaknesses. They're always going to ask you, almost always, but it's very typical. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Why do you want to work here? Why did you want to become an NP? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Be prepared. They're going to ask you that. There's no reason you shouldn't have given some of those, that low-hanging fruit questions some thought before you get into it. They may ask you some clinical stuff that's impossible to anticipate what that might be, but at least have some thoughts about what your strengths and weaknesses are, why you want to do this, all those sort of standard questions. They really are standard. Almost everyone I talk to after their interview says, yep, they asked me that. And so you don't want to flounder when they say, tell us a little bit about yourself. Elevator speech in your head, like just no reason not to do that. You'll be able to use it on every interview. And let them do the question asking, of course. I mean, try not to take the lead. That was when I was a recruiter, that we heard that a lot, that oftentimes interviewees would sort of they called it hijacking, take over the interview and start guiding it in different directions. And then the other thing that you absolutely must have, and it's easy even for a new grad, a seasoned oftentimes are a little better at thinking up questions to ask, but when they say, do you have questions? You better have at least a couple of them. Because if you don't have any and you go, oh, no, I think I'm good, they're going to think you're completely uninterested. There's a lot of things you can ask about. If you're a new NP, have you ever had a new NP before? Why did the previous person leave their position? What does it take to succeed in your organization? There's just tons of questions you can ask that show your thinking about it. Who would I have a mentor? What's your orientation process like? Just all that sort of thing. But you're not going to ask 10 of them, but pick out a couple that you do want to know too, and be ready to ask those. There's nothing worse than finishing an interview and the person has no questions. It's just it just does not look good. And then do not negotiate while you're in there. Like, well, I know the job says Monday through Thursday, but have you ever considered me, Tuesday through Friday? No. All that should come up once you have an offer. So that was another huge complaint, that people started kind of negotiating. They weren't even offered the job, but they started trying to negotiate things. And the other is, and that's why I recommend people write their own resumes, that a lot of people, they would say, didn't seem to know their own resume. Make sure you know dates and so on, and what's in your resume. If you have somebody else write it, that can happen. Or if you generate it, I'm sure there's artificial intelligence that will write you a resume. But if you are not intimately associated with your own resume, there's a bit of a problem there.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Oh, your resume says this, and then you have a look of surprise.
Yeah. Or that looks like that was an interesting rotation at blah, blah, blah. Tell me, you said you did this. You go, oh, I did.
Yeah.
And then, of course, be truthful. It's always good when they're asking for things to give some examples, because another common question is, talk about sometime when you had a conflict. How did you manage a difficult patient who was angry or something like that? Have a couple examples in your head of a time that you had a conflict with someone, whether it be a patient, a supervisor, another colleague, whatever, and have that example ready to give. Same thing with an angry or upset patient. How do you manage stress? Talk about or multitasking, or use something, kind of have an example to go with it, and not a made up one, of course. But have an example, because that kind of helps to, cement it more if you can talk about a situation. I know, even back when we were taking people, I was on the panel that did interviews to be admitted into the FNP program, when people had great stories to go with some of our questions, that was like, wow. As the interviewer, you just relate,
Right.
Okay, you don't always end up sounding like the brightest person in the room. You just talk about what you learned from it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that I used to ask potential, candidates, I would, depending on the position, I would have a clinical situation made up in my head.
Yeah,
And, one of them, particularly like for an MA or a receptionist, the clinic would just be crazy, crazy, crazy. And this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. You've got all these people in the waiting room. How are you going to prioritize? But the same
yes,
thing with a, for clinician, one time at a job interview that I did horrible at, again, it was part of that do your homework. And it
mhm,
was during that desperate time of needing to get a spot. It turned out it was a maternal child clinic. I do not do maternal child. I am not a pediatric person, and I couldn't at that time really tell you one formula from another. And yet those were the questions that I
yeah,
was asked. So, do your homework and know the kinds of patients, because, those clinical questions, part of that was, how do you think on your feet?
yeah. They're oftentimes looking to see how you
Yeah,
think, not even so much what the answer is,
right.
but
But
what is
just,
your process? So you can share more of that than maybe, knowing exactly what the answer is. I remember my son, who's not in medicine at all, or healthcare, but he, in his current job, when he very first applied for it, he said he had a question about, this person comes to you and says, oh, I need to have this done by this time. And this other person comes and says, oh, can you do this for me? I need to have this at this certain time. How do you do that? And rather than, trying to like figure out which of those was more important, he just said, well, I'd go to the person and say, look, I have this other work I have to do too. Like the communication piece was what ended up impressing them. They
right.
told him later. So it wasn't so much like he was supposed to know which project was more important, or,
Right,
but
right.
that
How
you
would you know if you
communicated,
hadn't?
look, I've got so-and-so asking me to do this and so, and so you can kind of apply that to what we do as well. Like, how
Right.
do you communicate? That's why examples help, because, you say to people, how do you handle conflict? Well, I would address it with the person, like all these great textbook answers. But when you can talk about when you actually did it, and maybe it was scary, or maybe it didn't go well, like, give an example that you can actually do what you said you can do.
What I mean, we've talked about so many different things here, but what would be the biggest thing for an NP that is looking for a job? What is the number one thing to kind of pull all this together and just, you know,
I think take a breath, be thoughtful about it. You do your homework, like you said, get some help if you need some help. If there's things that you're just unsure of, maybe you just need somebody to bounce it off of. Find somebody to help, but just be thoughtful about it. And then again, going back to that, is this really what you want to do? Make sure you're really interested about it. People can kind of sense if you're not really invested. That does come across, whether you think it does or not. Um, you just don't come across, and it's a lot of it, I think, is subconscious. Just don't come across that engaged in it or something. So, really stop and think, is this what I want? Same thing, when you get offers too, or when you do interviews, you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And you really have to just, decide if it's a good fit, not only for your clinical skills, but your personality. We all know every place has a culture, a workplace culture. Do you fit in with it? Does it match your personality? Because it's really hard to succeed being kind of who you aren't. If you need a little more laid back, seek that out. If you like very formal, seek that out. But it's tough to put, a square peg in a round hole. And, that most people that when I was recruiting, vast majority of people who were seeking new jobs were not doing it because of pay. It was the workplace environment. That was the driving factor. They were ready even to take someplace with less pay just to be happy.
Yeah.
And to have a better fit. And likewise, the employer wants to make sure, it's a big process to hire somebody, and it's very expensive for them as well. They want to make sure that, you fit in their culture as well. They don't want to bring you in there and have it be, go sideways on them. They invest a lot in hiring somebody, which is, when you start to feel discouraged about the big, long process, just, think about that. It's not you. And the other thing I would say in this market, don't feel bad if you're having trouble. Don't start letting you think there's something wrong with you. There's not. I talked to lots of skilled people that, would be wonderful, but it's just a tough market. And you're out there competing. Remember, as a new graduate, if, we're kind of talking mostly to new graduates today, but to anybody, but as a new graduate, remember, your competition is seasoned NPs. It's not just other new grads. So that's why you really need to, put out your best qualities out there that fit and do your homework. And then again, like I said, just take a breath. And if that means taking a break from a little bit, then do that. Don't jump into something that again might be a little bit hard to get out of. And as you mentioned to me when we were talking before this, it's not a good reason to start your own business. It's just not. That's hard for seasoned people. That's really a rough one. I don't think that's a good choice as a new graduate. I'm sure there's some exceptions out there that have made it work, but that's probably the exception. I think you're better off getting some good experience, getting a feel for the role as a provider, not a student provider, and just being very thoughtful about it. Because even if you do ultimately want to start your own business, you change how you think that's going to work after you've worked a little while. You're going to get some insights that are invaluable to nailing down what you do want to do.
Yeah, definitely. It's starting a business is not for the faint of heart, and it is also not for the new person.
Right.
Learn how to be an NP first, and then then the sky is yours. Then you can do what you want, and there's plenty of us out there that would be glad to help you do that. Lots of information. But I mean, myself, having owned 2 different practices, I would have never been able to start the business, those practices, being a new grad. I know that. And yes, there's a few exceptions out there. There's always little exceptions, but those are far and few between. So
that's right.
So Renee, if someone needs to get a hold of you, how do they find you? Tell people how to get a hold of the NP coach.
Yeah, well, I'm on the web. I have a website, although I'm kind of thinking of changing it here soon. But as for now, I still have the website. It's NP Career Coach. You can contact me through that. I have a couple of some, they're super cheap. They're like $1.99, where you can download kind of a guide for resumes. And I believe I have one up that's geared towards new graduates, especially. I have a Facebook group as well. Again, just an NP career coach. I'm in LinkedIn. I kind of all over the place.
Okay, great. I will definitely have the links below the video. And for those of you listening on the audio podcast, you'll find it in the show notes. And so great. I am so glad that we got to do this. And do this again. I mean, I think it's been many years since we actually had this particular conversation. And
I think it was pre-pandemic. Everything in my life was pre-pandemic and post-pandemic.
Yeah, I think it was well pre-pandemic.
Yes.
So it was definitely a while ago. And so this was a good time to have this again. And I know you and I will be talking again soon. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All righty. So bye-bye now.
Bye.
Now, I really hope that you found some value in this particular episode, whether you are a new graduate, a recent graduate, or a seasoned nurse practitioner looking for a job, but also if you are the nurse practitioner who is looking to hire into your practice. What are some of the things that you also want to think about as you are looking at candidates in today's job market? I would love to hear about what you are looking for in your practice over at our show notes at npbusiness.org/76. And for those of you that are in the job market, go ahead and leave a comment as well. Let us know what you are finding as you are out there looking for your first or 20th NP job. I appreciate and thank you so much for you taking the time to listen to this podcast, for leaving us a favorable review, and for sharing it with your colleagues, because all of us, all nurse practitioners, need to understand the business of being a nurse practitioner. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of the NP Business Matters podcast. Bye-bye now.